Hard power in international relations. In the realm of international relations, power manifests in various forms. Hard power, specifically, refers to the use of military and economic means to influence the behavior or interests of other political bodies. It stands in contrast to soft power, which relies on persuasion, attraction, and cultural influence rather than coercion. The Roman Empire provides a compelling historical example of hard power in action. Its military conquest and subsequent control over vast territories were central to its dominance. The enforcement of Roman law and administrative structures further solidified its influence across its conquered lands. The Mongol Empire, under the leadership of figures like Genghis Khan, also exemplified hard power. Their highly disciplined and mobile army enabled them to conquer a vast swathe of Eurasia. This military prowess allowed them to establish control over trade routes and extract tribute from subjugated populations. Examining these historical empires reveals a common thread in the application of hard power. Territorial expansion was a key objective, allowing for the control of vital resources. The establishment of a global or regional order, often through force, was another defining characteristic. In the modern era, the United States stands as a prominent example of a nation wielding significant hard power. Its formidable military strength, coupled with its economic influence, allows it to project power globally. This capacity shapes international relations in numerous ways. Military interventions, such as those in Iraq and Afghanistan, serve as demonstrations of the United States' capacity for global force projection. These interventions, while controversial, highlight the willingness to use military force to achieve strategic objectives. They also underscore the complex consequences of such actions. Economic sanctions represent another facet of hard power employed by the United States and other nations. These sanctions often target states like Iran and North Korea, restricting their access to international trade and financial transactions. The aim is to compel these states to alter their policies, particularly in areas such as nuclear proliferation or human rights. Military force, as a tool of hard power, encompasses a wide range of actions. These can range from limited strikes targeting specific assets to full-scale invasions aimed at regime change. The purposes of military force include deterring aggression, protecting allies, and, in some cases, overthrowing regimes deemed hostile. However, the use of military force carries significant costs. These costs include the loss of human lives, the expenditure of vast resources, and potential damage to a nation's international reputation. The decision to employ military force is therefore a complex calculation involving numerous factors. Economic sanctions offer a less direct approach to enforcing a nation's will. They serve as a form of punishment for states that violate international norms or engage in undesirable behavior. Examples of such behavior include human rights abuses, support for terrorism, and the pursuit of nuclear weapons programs. While economic sanctions are often seen as a less violent alternative to military force, they can have significant consequences. They can impact civilian populations, leading to economic hardship and social unrest. The effectiveness of sanctions in achieving their intended policy goals can also vary considerably. The imposition of sanctions requires careful consideration of potential unintended consequences. A comprehensive understanding of the target state's economy and political system is crucial. Furthermore, international cooperation is often necessary to ensure that sanctions are effective. Sanctions can take various forms, including trade embargoes, asset freezes, and financial restrictions. The specific type of sanction employed depends on the nature of the targeted behavior and the desired outcome. The design and implementation of sanctions require careful planning and coordination. The effectiveness of economic sanctions is often debated. Some argue that they are a powerful tool for influencing state behavior, while others contend that they are often ineffective and can even be counterproductive. The impact of sanctions depends on a variety of factors, including the target state's resilience, the level of international support for the sanctions, and the specific design of the sanctions regime. The use of economic sanctions raises ethical considerations. Critics argue that sanctions can disproportionately harm vulnerable populations, leading to humanitarian crises. Proponents of sanctions argue that they are a necessary tool for upholding international norms and preventing more harmful actions, such as military conflict. The debate over the effectiveness and ethical implications of economic sanctions continues to shape international relations. As a tool of hard power, sanctions remain a controversial but frequently used instrument in the foreign policy arsenals of many nations. Their application requires careful consideration of both their potential benefits and their potential costs. The history of economic sanctions is replete with examples of both successes and failures. Some sanctions regimes have achieved their intended policy goals, while others have failed to produce the desired results. The lessons learned from these past experiences can inform the design and implementation of future sanctions regimes. The future of economic sanctions is likely to be shaped by several factors, including the rise of new economic powers, the increasing interconnectedness of the global economy, and the evolving nature of international threats. As the world becomes more complex, the use of economic sanctions will likely remain a prominent feature of international relations. The effectiveness of economic sanctions is also influenced by the availability of alternative sources of supply for the targeted state. If a state can easily circumvent sanctions by obtaining goods and services from other countries, the impact of the sanctions will be diminished. Therefore, international cooperation is essential for ensuring that sanctions are effective. The use of economic sanctions can also have unintended consequences for the imposing state. For example, sanctions can disrupt trade relationships and harm domestic industries. Therefore, policymakers must carefully weigh the potential costs and benefits of imposing sanctions before taking action. The debate over the use of economic sanctions is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. As a tool of hard power, sanctions represent a complex and often controversial instrument of foreign policy. Their application requires careful consideration of both their potential benefits and their potential costs. The effectiveness of economic sanctions is also influenced by the political context in which they are imposed. If the target state is facing internal political instability, sanctions may be more likely to succeed. However, if the target state is united in its opposition to the sanctions, they may be less effective. The use of economic sanctions can also be seen as a form of signaling. By imposing sanctions, a state can send a message to the target state and to the international community that it disapproves of the target state's behavior. This signaling effect can be an important component of the overall strategy of using sanctions. The debate over the use of economic sanctions is often framed in terms of a trade-off between effectiveness and humanitarian concerns. Some argue that sanctions should be designed to minimize harm to civilian populations, even if this reduces their effectiveness. Others argue that the primary goal of sanctions should be to achieve the desired policy outcome, even if this means that civilian populations suffer. The use of economic sanctions is also subject to legal constraints. International law prohibits the imposition of sanctions that are intended to cause widespread suffering or that violate fundamental human rights. Therefore, policymakers must carefully consider the legal implications of imposing sanctions before taking action. The effectiveness of economic sanctions is also influenced by the degree to which they are enforced. If sanctions are not effectively enforced, they are unlikely to achieve their intended policy goals. Therefore, it is important to have a robust enforcement mechanism in place to ensure that sanctions are complied with. The use of economic sanctions is also subject to political considerations. Policymakers must consider the potential impact of sanctions on their relationships with other countries. They must also consider the potential domestic political consequences of imposing sanctions. The debate over the use of economic sanctions is likely to continue as long as they remain a tool of foreign policy. As the world becomes more complex, the challenges of using sanctions effectively will only increase. Therefore, it is important to continue to study and analyze the use of economic sanctions in order to improve their effectiveness and minimize their unintended consequences. Hard power remains a fundamental aspect of international relations. Military force and economic sanctions serve as key tools in a nation's arsenal. These tools are employed to protect national interests, influence the behavior of other states, and shape the global landscape. The use of hard power is often controversial, raising ethical and practical considerations. However, it remains a critical instrument in the complex and often volatile world of international politics. Understanding its dynamics is essential for navigating the challenges of global governance.